The fire had burned low by the time she slipped through the cracked chapel door, its smoke-thick shadows twisting across stone and wood like the fingers of old ghosts. Somewhere behind her, the sisters were still shouting, their voices muffled by the wind that whistled through the crooked eaves. She clutched the scorched Bible close to her chest, its charred edge still warm, the leather binding curling like leaves gone to ash. It smelled of smoke and old grief, and her hands trembled not from fear but from memory. Her name was Amity. It wasn't the name they gave her when they took her from the riverbank all those years ago, but it was the one she kept hidden like a spark under kindling. Small, defiant, hers. The nuns had given her another name, Mary Elizabeth, soft and double-barreled like the prayers they muttered over her while scrubbing her raw in the stone-walled baths, but she let it wither like the garden she wasn't allowed to tend. Tonight the world was made of cinders. She limped through the courtyard on feet bloodied and raw, her thin boots soaked through from the snow that fell in soft, silent sheets. Her hair hung loose in damp ropes, shorn bluntly at the chin where Sister Agnella had taken the shears last spring, muttering about vanity. The wind needled through her thin cotton shift, stitched at the mission by other girls with the same hollow stare. She learned early not to cry where they could see. Crying earned you the birch rod. Or worse, silence. But tonight she was free. The prairie was a pale, endless plain stretched beneath a sky heavy with stars, each one sharp as a needle. Amity kept her head down, walking east, always east, though she had no map, only a half-remembered story once whispered to her by the eldest girl in the dormitory. Past the orchard, through the willows, down river until the fence breaks, and then keep going until you find the light. She didn't know what the light was, but she believed in it, the way a root believes in rain. The Bible pressed against her ribs was not the one they had given her. That one had gold-edged pages and no creases. This one was different, older. It had been hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the chapel library, pages crinkled and worn, margins filled with tiny, slanting notes written in a woman's hand. Names, questions, sometimes a simple why scrawled beside certain verses. The first time Amity found it, she had read the same line over and over again until it engraved itself into her. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Treasure, heart. She had neither, but she clung to the verse all the same. The fire hadn't been part of the plan. She only meant to take the book and slip away into the dark, but the lamp had tipped, oil spilling fast as sin across the chapel floor. Flames rose like fury. By the time the bells rang, she was already scaling the back wall, skirts singed, lashes white with frost. She didn't look back, not once. By dawn, the wind had calmed. Snow layered the earth in a hush so deep it made her ears ring. Her breath fogged in front of her, shallow and fast. Hunger gnawed at her ribs, her legs threatened to fold. But ahead, the trees broke, and a faint trail led down through a hollow where smoke curled from a stone chimney. She crouched behind a thicket, watching. The house was small, low-roofed, built into the bend of a hill as though trying not to be noticed. A barn stood beyond it, horses rustling in their stalls. No sign of nuns, no bells, no crosses carved into the lintels. Just a woman standing on the porch, wrapped in a thick coat, her hair loose and long, reading aloud to a girl who sat curled beside her on a wool blanket. Amity leaned forward, squinting. The girl was about her age, maybe younger. Her cheeks were pink with cold, and her boots were too big. But her face was turned toward the reader with a quiet, listening stillness that made something twist inside Amity's chest. She knew that stillness, knew what it cost to earn. The woman closed the book, kissed the girl's temple, and went inside. The girl lingered a moment, then tucked the book beneath her coat and slipped around the back of the house, toward the barn. Amity waited until she was out of sight before stepping into the clearing, her body screaming against the cold. Each step was a gamble, but she followed the path the girl had taken, heart pounding. The barn door creaked as she pushed it open. A rush of warmth greeted her, mingled with the rich scent of hay and horse. The girl turned, eyes wide. They stared at each other in the golden quiet, snow melting from Amity's shoulders in slow drops. She held the burned Bible tight, as though it might protect her from whatever came next. The girl blinked. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. Amity's voice came out hoarse, like something broken. "I know." The girl hesitated, then stepped forward. "You ran from the mission." It wasn't a question. Amity nodded. The girl looked at the Bible, at the charred edges, and then back at her eyes. Did it burn? Amity nodded again. The girl reached into her coat, pulled out her book. A red cloth cover, frayed at the corners, the spine held together with twine. She opened it and held it out, offering. "You can read mine," she said quietly, "but you gotta stay quiet, Pa don't know." Amity took it with fingers shaking not from cold this time, but from something like awe. "What's your name?" the girl asked. "Amity. I'm Clara." The horses stirred behind them, gentle giants watching. The barn creaked as the wind shifted, and for the first time in her life, Amity felt the kind of silence that wasn't punishment, but peace. A beginning. The barn became her first shelter, a sanctuary made of wood and dusk and the quiet presence of animals who asked nothing and gave warmth without judgment. She slept in the loft, buried in old quilts Clara had smuggled from the cellar, the air thick with the smell of hay and horses and dust. In the dark hours before dawn, when the wind howled against the eaves like it remembered her name, Amity curled into herself and listened to the barn breathe. Clara came every day. She came with bread crusts tucked in her sleeves, apples stolen from the winter cellar, a bit of cheese wrapped in wax paper. She came with the red cloth book, dog-eared and full of pencil marks. She came with stories whispered so low Amity had to lean in close to hear, their heads nearly touching, breath shared between syllables. "My pa thinks I'm feeding the stray cat," Clara whispered one morning, nudging a sliver of dried meat into Amity's palm. "He never saw it, but he believes in cats more than he'd believe in you." Amity's mouth quirked. "You tell good lies." Clara grinned. "I've had to." They didn't speak of the mission, not directly, but it hung there between them like the frost that crusted the barn door every morning, unseen, bitter, shaping everything. Clara had never been taken, but she'd heard the stories. Her mother's cousin, a neighbor's boy who came back with his hands always shaking. She knew enough to understand what Amity didn't say. "You ever want to go back?" Clara asked once, not looking at her. Amity didn't answer. She was watching a beam of sunlight shift across the wall, illuminating the curl of a mare's tail, golden and dreamlike. After a long silence, she whispered, "There's no back." Clara didn't press. The days grew longer. The snow began to soften at the edges, turning to slush underfoot. Somewhere deep in the hills, a creek began to murmur again, its ice loosening like a breath held too long. Clara brought a pair of boots that didn't fit her anymore and a wool shirt with a missing button. "Ma's old things," she said. "She won't notice." "Where is she?" Amity asked, quiet. Clara shrugged, but her fingers twitched where they gripped the hay. "Gone before I knew her." Amity said nothing. She knew the shape of that emptiness too well to name it. It was in early March when the first trouble came. A man rode up the trail one gray morning, his horse lathered and anxious. Clara spotted him from the kitchen window and ran, breathless, to the barn where Amity was mending a tear in her coat with borrowed thread. "You gotta stay out of sight," Clara said, pushing the needle from her hands. "Pa says folks are askin' questions in town about a girl who burned a chapel down." Amity went still, her fingers curled into fists. "Don't worry," Clara added quickly. "He didn't say nothin', but this fella's not from here." Amity climbed to the loft, heart hammering. Through a crack in the boards, she watched the man dismount, dust heavy on his coat, face hard and sharp as flint. He spoke low to Clara's father, who stood stiff and silent on the porch, arms crossed. Amity couldn't hear the words, but she knew the tone, authority, suspicion. That cold certainty the nuns had worn like rosaries. After the man left, Clara came back pale, fists jammed in her pockets. "He's from the mission," she said. "They said someone lit the chapel like kindling and ran. He's got a name." Amity said nothing, just pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders and looked away. Clara sat beside her, quiet. "You're not safe here," she said eventually. "Pa didn't tell, but he's nervous now. You can't stay in the barn." "Then where?" Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked toward the ridge where the sun was sinking, gold bleeding into violet. "There's an old line shack out past the north pasture," she said. "Nobody goes there anymore. You could hide there a while. I'll bring you what you need." Amity hesitated. "What if he comes back?" Clara didn't smile, but her eyes held a fierce light. "Then we'll move again." They left under cover of dark, carrying a sack of bread, a tin of coffee, matches, and the red cloth book. Clara led the way, nimble in the snow-melt mud, her lantern low and hood drawn up. Amity followed close, the Bible wrapped in oilcloth beneath her coat. The shack was no more than 4 walls and a crooked roof, but it held a stove, a cot, and a broken window patched with canvas. To Amity, it looked like a cathedral. Clara lit the stove and warmed her hands. "It's not much, but it's yours now." Amity sat on the cot, watching the shadows dance. "You always help runaways." Clara looked at her for a long time, something unreadable in her gaze. Then she knelt beside the cot and pulled the red book from her coat, pressing it into Amity's hands. "Not always," she said, "just the ones who carry fire and don't burn from it." That night Amity didn't sleep. She sat with the red book open in her lap, the burned Bible beside it, and read the same passage Clara had marked in pencil. "When I passed by thee, and saw thee polluted in thine own blood, I said unto thee, Live." She read it over and over until the words stopped hurting and started to feel like a promise. Spring came with a stubborn kind of grace. The ice unclenched its grip on the hills, revealing dark earth veined with water and promise. In the mornings, mist coiled over the low places, soft and silver. Wild geese moved overhead in arrowed flight, their cries trailing long behind them like threads pulling winter away. Amity made the shack her own. She patched the canvas window with old grain sacks Clara brought, lined the walls with stacked wood, swept out the dead mice and the ghosts. Clara came most evenings, bringing small offerings, a bundle of radishes, a needle carved from bone, pages torn from old newspapers folded neat inside her pocket. She brought poems once, verses she'd memorized from her mother's girlhood copy of Whittier, and recited them in a hush like prayer. In return, Amity taught her the songs her grandmother used to hum before the river took her, songs in another tongue, soft as the hush of pine trees. Clara didn't ask what they meant. She only listened, her head tilted, eyes full of that aching, reverent stillness. They moved carefully. Clara's father had grown watchful, suspicion curling under his skin like a briar. Amity never lit the stove during the day. Smoke meant questions. She collected deadfall wood at dawn and washed in the creek before sunrise. Her world shrank to the rhythm of caution and candlelight. But still, there was a kind of happiness, the kind that grew in quiet places, fed by little kindnesses and the steady beat of survival. She learned the names of Clara's horses by listening from the barn rafters. Learned the taste of sugar once again when Clara brought a single brown lump wrapped in linen. Learned, slowly, that being seen by someone who chose you over fear was a kind of resurrection. Until the letter came. Clara arrived one evening with her hair windblown and her face tight as a knotted thread. She didn't sit, just paced the narrow room, boots muddy, breath uneven. "They sent for him," she said. "That man, the one asking about you, he's coming back." Amity sat still, hands in her lap. "He's bringing someone," Clara continued. "They think you might have gone north. Pa says they'll check the ranch again." Amity stared at the floor, her voice low. "How long do I have?" "2 days, maybe less." The silence stretched. Clara sat down hard beside her, shoulders tense. "You could keep running, past the ridge. There's mining camps out that way. Men don't ask questions if you can. They traveled by silence and instinct, following the bones of old cattle trails where no one watched and nothing needed explaining. The sky hung wide and merciless above them, full of circling hawks and early thunderheads that threatened rain but held it like a withheld confession. Southward, the land rolled in ochre waves, hills breaking open into ravines where rabbits darted and cottonwoods reached skyward like prayers in wood. Clara rode ahead most days, her eyes scanning for danger, men, fences, tracks that didn't belong. Amity followed close behind, her horse a lanky roan that moved with the weary caution of a beast long used to outrunning worse things than wolves. She'd never ridden much before the mission, but the rhythm came back to her like a half-forgotten hymn, bone-deep and patient. At night they made small fires only when the cold pressed in too sharp to ignore. They cooked little, slept lighter. Once, they startled awake to find a coyote watching them from the edge of the firelight, its yellow eyes unblinking. Clara tossed a stone and it slinked off, soundless, into the dark. "They follow the smell of bread," she murmured, "and women alone." Amity lay back down without answering. She knew the truth in that. By the 5th day, their food was nearly gone. Clara rationed the last apple between them, slicing it with her mother's old penknife and handing Amity the larger half without a word. The knife was bone-handled, initials carved into the side, L.F., worn nearly smooth by time. "You don't talk about her," Amity said as they chewed. Clara looked up at the sky, where buzzards circled in lazy arcs. "She died birthing me, least that's what Pa said, but he never told it soft." Amity waited. He said she was too wild, didn't listen, that God punished her for being stubborn. She laughed low and bitter. "Guess I come by it honest." Amity reached for the red cloth book, open to a page worn thin. The pencil mark beside the verse read, "You are not cursed for being unyielding. You are alive because of it." She read it aloud. Clara listened, then smiled, not wide but true. "You ever think maybe survival is holy?" Amity didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. "I know it is." They reached San Miguel on the edge of dusk, just as the wind picked up and a storm finally broke its silence. Rain fell in hard sheets, drumming on the rooftops, turning the dust streets to rivers. They tied their horses behind a feed store and made their way to the far edge of town, where adobe homes leaned low and strong against the elements. The woman Clara sought lived behind a sagging blue door with a red string tied around the handle. Her name was Esther, and she was nothing like Amity expected. Tall, silver-haired, wrapped in a shawl the color of dusk, she looked them over without fear, without surprise. "You're late," she said, stepping aside. "Get in before you drown." Inside, the house smelled of cornmeal and sage. A single lamp burned on the table. Amity saw books piled high in every corner, herbs strung from the rafters. A cat lounged by the fire, tail twitching. Esther poured tea. Her hands were rough with work, her eyes soft with something older than pity. "You've been carrying something heavy," she said to Amity. "I can see it in your shoulders." Amity nodded once, unable to speak. Esther looked at Clara, "And you've chosen to carry it with her." "I have," Clara said. "Then stay as long as you need," Esther replied, without asking a single question more. That night Amity slept in a real bed for the first time in years. The mattress dipped with warmth, the blankets smelled of cedar and lavender. She dreamed of a river not frozen, of hands reaching but not taking. When she woke, Clara was asleep in the cot across the room, one arm thrown over her eyes, mouth parted in soft breath. Outside, the storm had passed. Days passed gently after that. Esther gave them tasks, grinding corn, tending the herb beds, helping with letters for women who came quietly asking for help. Some needed a place to rest. Others left notes for children hidden away. One left a gold ring behind, no name, only the word forgive scratched into a scrap of linen. Amity watched and learned. She learned how to brew pain root into tea, how to mend torn seams with thread made from flax, how to speak without naming wounds. Clara carved a new handle for the old penknife. She helped Esther map safe trails on old cloth scraps. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, she sat with Amity on the porch, their books open on their laps, reading in turns, trading verses like promises. It wasn't peace yet, not entirely. But it was a life stitched from pieces both broken and chosen, a kind of defiant, sacred calm. And in the soft hush of dusk, as the sky turned the color of forgiveness, Amity began to believe in something she never thought she'd feel again. Home, the summer came in slow, golden waves. Heat pressed down like a quilt on the shoulders of the land, heavy and humming, full of the dry crackle of locusts and the scent of sagebrush. In San Miguel, life moved slower, deliberate as the wind that rolled through the hills. Women came and went from Esther's porch, wrapped in dust cloaks and stories, carrying children or grief, sometimes both. Amity learned their names, one by one. She swept the porch each morning, peeled peaches for canning, read aloud to Clara under the cottonwood tree that leaned over the back fence like an old man listening for thunder. Some days she helped Esther walk into town to trade herbs and salves, her eyes scanning every face they passed, heart still skittish as a colt. But no one asked her name. No one called her Mary Elizabeth. That name had dried up in the fire with the chapel rafters, turned to smoke and memory. Still, the mission lingered. One morning, Clara returned from the market with a folded newspaper tucked into her waistband. She waited until the porch was empty, then handed it to Amity with a face gone pale and grim. "They're building it again." Amity unfolded the paper with careful fingers. There it was, printed in clean serif type. Restoration begins on Sacred Heart mission after vandalism fire. Below it, a photograph, grainy but unmistakable, scaffolding, stones. A figure in black robes gesturing toward the ruins with solemn conviction. She stared at the page until the words swam. "I thought it was done," Clara whispered. "Thought maybe they'd let it go." "They don't let go," Amity said low. "They rebuild." She folded the paper without looking at it again. Inside her, something old and silent stirred. Not fear, not exactly. Something deeper. A wound rubbed raw. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat on the back step, watching the sky. No moon. Only stars, scattered like bone fragments across the dark. Clara found her there, barefoot, hair unbound. She sat without speaking, shoulders touching. "They want the world to forget," Amity said after a long while. "Pretend it never happened." Clara was quiet. Amity turned to her. "But I remember, and that makes me dangerous." Clara looked at her then, full in the face. "You're not dangerous, you're sacred." They didn't kiss, not yet, but something between them shifted, soft and certain. The next morning, a knock came at the door. It was a boy, maybe 12, dust-caked and wide-eyed. He held out a note with hands trembling. "Esther sent me from Abiquiu," he said. "There's trouble." The note was short. A name, a place, a woman hiding with her child in a ravine near Chimyo, pursued by a man claiming to be a missionary but traveling with a badge and a shotgun. Esther read it, her mouth set in a grim line. "She's like you," she said to Amity, "one of the taken." Amity folded the note. "Then I'll go." Esther looked to Clara, who was already fetching the satchel and checking the pistol. "We'll go," she said. They rode hard for 2 days, through scrub and canyon and sunburned silence. On the second night they found the woman. Her name was Riene, huddled under an overhang with her baby tucked against her breast. She flinched at their approach until Amity stepped forward and said, quiet but clear, "We're not here to return you. We're here to walk beside you." The woman wept then, soundlessly, like someone who'd forgotten how to be heard. Clara kept watch that night while Amity held the child and Riene slept for the first time in 3 days. The baby was fevered and weak, but still breathing. Amity cradled her close, whispering old songs under her breath, songs from before. The next morning, they moved at dawn. Clara led them through the back trails, down into the low country where thick brush masked their passage. Amity carried the child, wrapped tight in her own shawl. Riene walked beside her, eyes still dazed, but clearer than before. It wasn't until the 3rd day they saw the rider. Far off, black coat, moving slow. They didn't wait to be seen. Clara veered them into a dried arroyo, hoofbeats masked by dust and haste. The sun beat down mercilessly. The baby whimpered in her sleep. Riene stumbled once, but Amity caught her, whispering, "One more bend, just one." They didn't stop until sunset, when the land opened into a hollow where no roads led. A place Esther had marked once on a cloth map. A cave, a spring, safety for now. Clara built a fire with shaking hands. "We're ghosts to him," she muttered. "He'll ride right past." Amity nodded, but inside she knew the truth. They were never ghosts to men like that. They were legends, warnings, stories told to keep others in line. She held the baby and hummed again, quieter now, not to soothe, but to remember, because the world needed remembering as much as it needed fire. That night, as they lay beneath the stars, Riene reached for Amity's hand. "Why do you help?" she asked. Her voice was like paper rubbed thin. Amity looked toward Clara, who slept with one hand resting near the pistol, breath even, mouth soft. "Because someone read to me when no one else would," she said, because she didn't look away. Riene's fingers curled gently into hers. "Then I won't either," she whispered. In the quiet that followed, Amity felt it again, that pull of something larger than fear. Not vengeance, not forgiveness, but witness. A life not just survived, but seen. The trail back to San Miguel was slower than the road out. They moved by moonlight, slipping through cottonwood groves and along riverbanks where frogs sang and the world felt ancient and kind. Riene rode with the baby against her chest, her shoulders straighter now, her gaze no longer drifting to the edges like a hunted thing. Clara rode ahead, her face sun-darkened, jaw set, but her eyes watchful with something like faith. Amity rode last. She watched the road behind them more than the path ahead, not out of fear anymore, but out of reverence. The journey behind them mattered now. The girl who fled a burning chapel and the one who kept a secret in a red book, they were still out there, walking behind her. Not lost, not undone, just transformed. It took 5 days to return. When they reached the edge of San Miguel, Renee chose not to stay. "There's a woman in Española," she said, eyes bright with new steadiness. "She works with the railroad, hides people under the floorboards." Esther gave her a name to ask for, wrapped a charm in cloth, kissed the baby's forehead. They didn't say goodbye with tears, just long, hard embraces, the kind that say, "I know, I see you, go well." After they were gone, Amity and Clara walked home side by side, their boots silent on the road. The sun was beginning to set, painting the adobe walls in gold and shadow. In the air hung the smell of smoke from a nearby cookfare and something else, sweet, like sage and new rain. Clara spoke first. "Are we staying?" Amity didn't answer right away. She looked toward the hills, where the light pooled in the folds of the earth like honey. She thought of the mission rebuilding itself from stone and memory, thought of the hands still reaching for someone to listen. "No," she said finally, "but we're not running either." Clara tilted her head. "Then what?" "We go forward," Amity said. "We make a place." That evening, Esther laid a small bundle on the kitchen table. Inside was a blackened edge of parchment, half a page from the burned Bible Amity had carried, brittle and fragile as a cicada shell. "It floated up in the well last week," Esther said. "Some things find their way home." Amity traced the scorched words with one finger. The verse was incomplete, but one line remained whole. "And lo, I am with you always." She didn't cry, but her chest ached like spring thaw, painful and full of coming life. That night in the room they now called theirs, Amity and Clara lay side by side, neither asleep, the heat thick and soft between them. The red book sat on the windowsill. The pistol lay, unloaded, beneath the bed. "Clara," Amity whispered. "What? What are we to each other?" Clara turned her face toward her. In the dark, her eyes were stars. "We're the story they tried to bury," she said. "We're the fire they couldn't smother." Amity nodded, then leaned forward and kissed her, not fierce, not desperate, just sure. It tasted of ash and honey, of beginning. By fall, they'd built something, not a mission, not a chapel, but a place where women came to read aloud by firelight and leave their names in the margins of worn books, where no one was scrubbed into silence, where children learned not just to recite, but to question. They named it Sparrow House. No one asked why. And when strangers came, looking for the burned girl or the rancher's daughter who went missing, no one knew where to send them. Only stories lived there now, and names carved into doorframes with quiet hands. Mary Elizabeth was never spoken again. But Amity remained. A flame, a promise. A girl who escaped with a burned Bible and built a sanctuary from pages and silence and love that asked nothing but to be seen.